What's up, friends? Welcome back to a very, very interesting episode. So my friend Billie Hoard, she is a dear friend. I've met her in person. We go into more of it in the intro, but she's wonderful. I brought her on to give me her thoughts about my recap of my time at Exiles in Babylon. Yeah. What does Billie think as a trans woman about Preston's work, about the conference I went to, about my thoughts? This is a great conversation. I'm such a fan of Billie. She's been on the podcast before with her brother on the theology of disgust. That's a couple episodes back in the podcast, maybe over a year ago, but wow, it is a must listen. Maybe if Noah's listening to this, he can throw it in the show notes or I can send him a link, but it is such a good episode. So I'm a huge fan of Billie. We get into all of it. We get into her thoughts, the good, the bad, the ugly, the problems, the promises, how things are complicated. It's wonderful. I think you're going to love this episode. Would love your feedback. Please leave a comment. I read all the YouTube comments, just so you know. I read all of them. So please leave a comment or shoot me an email if you're listening on the podcast, info@thenewEvangelicals.com. Would love your thoughts. Friends, thank you for being here. We are a nonprofit organization. The reason why I'm able to bring amazing conversations like this one is because we are a donation-based nonprofit. All of this work is paywall free. There's no Patreon. There's no subscription model. There's no secret podcast episodes if you pay me money. No, it's all available to people like you, completely free because of the generosity of people like you. So if you'd be willing and able to donate, that would be so helpful. Monthly donors are the fuel. They are the lifeblood for this work. And here's the good news. It does not take much. If all of us chipped in a little bit, $10 a month, $15 a month, we would be fully funded and able to do even more of this work on a better level, having more of these very important conversations. So if that is something you want to help out with, the link is in the show notes. All donations made in the US are tax deductible. Thank you for being here. Great talking to you. Let me know what you think about this episode. Talk to you all soon. Wait. Guys, I'm so sorry. Before I get to the interview, I forgot that I got permission to share my 15-minute speech from the Exiles in Babylon conference. So I'm going to play that first. That way you have some context to hear what I said in front of all these people, and then we'll get into the conversation with Billie. I hope you enjoy this. Let me know what you think. Talk to you all soon. We're starting this thing off with a bang. The Marxist has arrived. I'm ready to overthrow. Join me, comrades. That's a complete joke, okay? I was homeschooled. We didn't read that kind of stuff. And also, because Preston already said it, I did rebuke all the Jezebel spirits in the room, so we're totally safe. But really, thank you, Preston, and it's really great to be here. My name is Tim Whitaker, and before I say anything, I want to thank Adele, who works with me on the creative side of our organization, who worked with me to refine this speech because the first draft was just not usable. I am the creator and facilitator of the New Evangelicals, but my board wants me to say that I'm the executive director, but that's way too corporate for me, but now I said it. So just to get you an idea of what we're about, the New Evangelicals exists to push the church forward. We're an inclusive, Jesus-centered community that holds space for those marginalized by the evangelical church through building community, exploring faith, and advocating for systemic change. TNE believes, oh, thank you, that's nice. TNE believes, and I personally believe, that these conversations are important. I have them every day via podcast, DMs, etc. So I'm really grateful to be on this panel and grateful to talk to all of you about our faith, because I understand that in the evangelical world that many of us exist in or have existed in, deconstruction remains a very volatile and misunderstood term. Countless Christian leaders, preachers, and writers have insisted that people who deconstructed just wanted that sweet, sweet street cred. Maybe we just wanted to sin more. Maybe we were under demonic oppression, or maybe we just never took our faith seriously. And these are all things I've heard, not just from the occasional comments, but from a significant portion of the church. Major faith leaders, pastors, and writers as well in the evangelical space. Maybe some of you are in this room who believe some of those things. I understand. But tonight, I want to personalize this story too. I must say it's interesting being more on the outside looking in these days than on the inside looking out. So before I break down what I believe deconstruction to be and some of the major reasons that there is a massive reckoning in evangelical spaces happening right now, I first wanted to give you my evangelical street cred. because I obviously have my progressive cred already, but there's more to that was funny, right? Yeah, thanks Adele, that was Adele's line, that's good. But there's more to a story of deconstruction than meets the eye. My story is like many in the evangelical world. I was homeschooled for 9 years. I also went to a small private school where I graduated, I'm happy to say, 5th in my class, out of 6th. My childhood church was very much steeped in John MacArthur-style preaching and theology. I was taught early on that God loves me, but God's wrath will be poured out on me in hell if I don't become a Christian ASAP. I loved growing up in the church, though. I really did. At age 8, I was wearing a suit and tie, handing out bulletins, and I was still 6'4", so that was cool. I started playing drums in the church at age 11, which I did for the next 22 years of my life. I was part of the largest children's ministry in the world at that time, which was called Child Evangelism Fellowship. I did mission trips overseas. I helped plant churches. I helped lead a local worship collective. My point is, I got the street cred, all right? I did it. I did the thing. And I believed all of it, and I still do. I did all of this because I was fully committed to being the best Christian I knew how to be. Everything I do and have done my entire life, truly, it's because of my allegiance to the way of Jesus as best as I understand it at any given moment. Believe it or not, today the work I do is a continuation of that. It's love for Jesus and for his church, because I know that the power of love can change everything. But somehow, I believe that we have lost our way, and it's my role and the role of TNE and many others in this space who I love and adore to create this conversation. Now, to be clear, I never heard of the term deconstruction until I started the New Evangelicals on Instagram, and the algorithm put me in touch with other people who were asking the same questions. But let me just back up and give a quick caveat, because honestly, the term deconstruction, it's not the term everyone uses or needs to use, okay? It's not a hard and fast rule. Personally, I like to say that I'm renegotiating my faith, or that I disentangled my faith, or that I went deeper into my faith, but I'm not really here to gatekeep people from using the word deconstruction to describe the experience of countless people around us. In fact, in the last 25 years, over 40 million people have left the church broadly in America. Now, of course, I'm not saying or suggesting that the only reason that happens is because people deconstructed. However, I would argue that there are millions of people who did. So yes, deconstruction is a valid term, and we'll unpack more later. So, how does someone go from being an Awana sword drill champion like myself, okay, yeah, again guys, street cred, I got it, all right, to here on this stage being the woke guy or something, I don't know. Here's my story, and in this story, you'll hear reflections of the thousands of stories I've heard from this community. Throughout my late teenage years and mid-20s, there were dozens, maybe even hundreds of micro experiences that planted little seeds in my head. Some of them were small, church culture moments that seemed odd. Why are we always waging war on Starbucks during Christmas time? That's a little weird. Others were larger, theological questions. If God is really good and powerful, why do people roast in hell for all of eternity so God can get the glory? This is all according to the sovereign plan of God that's clearly taught in Scripture? Okay. I also noticed other things, like for example, in my childhood church, I was taught that women were forbidden to preach, and the gifts of the Holy Spirit do not happen, and that Assemblies of God church down the street is probably demonically influenced. I'm sorry, all you AGers, but it's true. The Bible's clear. Of course, that was all backed up by the Bible, right? And then when I started playing drums in a youth group band that was more charismatic, as they were playing the cool music like Hillsong United, they told me that, no, women should preach in church. And if we don't have the gifts of the Spirit, especially speaking in tongues, you might not be saved. Oh, by the way, the Reformed church down the street was also probably under demonic oppression. And guess what? They also said the Bible was clear and taught these positions. So being curious about my faith, I read everyone I could get my hands on. I read Shane Claiborne, I read John MacArthur, John Piper, Brian McLaren, Paul Washer, and Preston, if you're listening, do not worry. The second I read that heretical book, Love Wins, I ran to my bookstore, picked up your copy of Erasing Hell, written with Francis Chan, to get the true biblical view of what the Bible clearly taught. I did it. Things get complicated, as you can tell, for people like me and probably for you. But there is one moment that's much larger that's worth mentioning here. It happened when I got my first big boy job working at that evil empire called Starbucks. At age 18, one of my coworkers was gay. Now, that made things complicated because I had been warned and I was worried about the gays. I grew up on a steady diet of talk radio and evangelical preaching, so I knew the objective facts. Gay people were sexually immoral deviants, and they were definitely not doing good things in the world, probably destroying the country as well. And what made this worse was my coworker was also an atheist. That's a double whammy. A gay atheist. Oh my goodness. Because my evangelical tradition taught me that atheists are incapable of standing on any kind of firm moral foundation. And also they're probably liberals who want to destroy the country. Also that. But you know what? It turned out my coworker was none of that. He was kind, he volunteered in his local community, he loved hardcore music like I did, and he was really thoughtful. We struck up a friendship because when you're embodied with someone in reality, it forces you to change your mind. My friend's embodiment was way more real than the myth I was told by evangelicalism. He told me a story I'm going to share with you now. He said that when he was 13, he told his youth pastor that he was struggling with his sexuality. And his youth pastor turned around, called him an abomination, and told him never to come back. Honestly, I've told this story a lot, and I get emotional every time. I was stunned. I was heartbroken. I wept. That experience changed me forever. I never knew that people could have harmful and hurtful church experiences because my experience was always so positive. How could the church embody hate rather than love? I didn't understand. For those of us that read a lot, deconstruction at some level was inevitable. I read Frank Viola's Pagan Christianity at age 18. I was ready to burn the entire megachurch complex down. Give me the torch, I'm ready. For those who don't know, Frank's premise of that book is that almost all of our modern church rituals come from pagan culture, not the New Testament. It is a very compelling read, in my opinion. So let's fast forward to 2016. Donald Trump runs for president and wins with 70% of the white evangelical vote. And yes, I have to bring up politics. These things are completely intertwined at this point. And when I saw this happen, I had no words. I was shell-shocked. Things unwound for me so much further. You see, I was not a liberal dying to find an excuse to deconstruct. In fact, I saw myself firmly committed to the Jesus of my evangelical tradition, which was why I was so shocked. I was taking what I was taught at face value. I was told my whole life that God's design for sexuality is one man and one woman for life and marriage. But Trump brags about grabbing women, is on his third marriage, sleeps with a porn star while his wife is pregnant, is on the cover of Playboy, and most importantly, never repents for the harm he commits, and suddenly I'm the one out of line because I can't vote for him? Does it make sense? And of course, this was only the beginning. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery forced me to face the reality that I did not see my entire life. I was taught that systemic racism no longer existed. We fixed it in the civil rights era, and my countless hours listening to Rush Limbaugh made it very clear. The people who complain today, that wasn't a joke, but it is kind of funny, isn't it, now that you say it? That's good. The people who complained today were whiners, liberals, and they hated America. But now I could see the reality was something different. Especially after I read the book, The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. It changed my life. You should read that book. Lastly, COVID. We have to talk about it. Once again, it was very difficult to watch Christians in the name of God defy health orders designed to protect their neighbor, choosing their rights over the needs of others. For one prominent worship leader, his answer to a global pandemic was touring the country, demanding the right to let us worship in mass. Now, I was a worship drummer at this point, well invested in that space. And I thought to myself, this is loving our neighbor? This isn't a political point. It just feels like Jesus 101. So I want to be clear here. All of my perspectives came from my Christian faith. Like so many who have wrestled through these events of recent history as well. These were moments, and there are more, that forced me to rethink everything. And that's the point of deconstruction, asking questions and being okay with potentially having new answers. It wasn't a crisis of faith for me. It was a crisis of theology. What do I believe about this God? What is this God like? How does this God move through the world, through history, and through humanity? And what do I do with this Bible? Because the more I dig, the more complicated it becomes. These aren't questions of a rebel. These are questions of a seeker. And that's why I started the New Evangelicals in December of 2020, just asking questions on Instagram. That was all it was at the time. And that's when everything went haywire. Suddenly, I was hearing literally from thousands of people about their experience in the evangelical church, most of which, by the way, were not men. They were women, people of color, queer folks, and others. And I was also watching at the same time some of the biggest names come crashing down, including at that time, the details of Ravi Zacharias' serial sexual abuse. And we know these stories haven't stopped, by my joke earlier today. And then it got worse. January 6th happened. As a nation, many of us watched, including myself. It was unreal. It was unbelievable. And then I was watching, and then the unbelievable came real. Christian flags and symbols parading through the Senate chambers. And then a defiant prayer to Jesus, thanking him for this opportunity to take back the country. I was jaw-dropped. How is my Christian faith a part of this rage-filled, me-filled, take my country back craze rebellion? So that's the story of my deconstruction and the story of thousands that want to follow Jesus, yet exist in the discomfort of it all. So why are we deconstructing? People asking this all the time. This is really important. There is no singular answer because deconstruction is not a movement. It is an explosion. That's a major difference. People are going in all different directions. But if I had to give three very broad categories of why people deconstruct, here's what I would say. First, it's bad theology. Being told that from birth you're a totally depraved and wicked person who can't trust their heart has caused millions of people to struggle with shame, insecurity, and self-doubt. Second, it's bad politics. In 2020, Trump was supported more by white evangelicals than he was in 2016, and white evangelicals were the most likely religious group to believe the election was stolen. That's just data. Third, it is incredibly frustrating to watch proven toxic male leaders still platformed by the evangelical world today who have no business being pastors, let alone having book deals, massive conferences, audiences, wink, wink, as we just saw last week, or biblical commentaries out for public consumption. Now, I'm not going to name drop here because it's not my conference and Preston's already in trouble because of me, sorry. But a quick glance at our podcast will show you exactly who we're talking about. It's beyond absurd. It's a decimation of the church's witness. So I know that there are a lot of very smart people in the room, and yes, I understand that deconstruction is a major philosophical term that we can debate endlessly, but to Jacques Derrida's point, words are truly flexible. Words can take on new meaning, and in this context, deconstruction means to rethink essential beliefs and being open to changing them. I want a more Christ-like Christianity. Are we a faith that truly insists on love, on inclusivity, on justice? If so, where are the fruits? Why are we still oppressing and marginalizing our vulnerable neighbors? Where is the healing? Where's the redemption? These are questions we must wrestle with. I wrestle with them every day. It's our imperative. And that's why I do the work that I do with the New Evangelicals. We're a digital-first nonprofit, and we work hard to accomplish three necessary things. First, we hold space for folks marginalized by the evangelical church. That means wrestling with questions that they're afraid to ask and not being afraid with them. Second, we advocate for accountability inside of evangelical spaces. That means we recognize the power of Christianity to change lives for good and for the not so good. We advocate that as Jesus followers, we should be held to a higher standard and build a better world around us. And thirdly, this is key, we help people explore the Christian tradition beyond evangelical fundamentalism. One of the gifts that deconstruction gave me was giving me permission to realize that I was actually in the basement of a huge house the whole time. I was just below ground. Hundreds of rooms, each with their own universes of theologians, historians, church leaders, and theologies awaited our exploration. And guess what? They don't all agree. I mean, for example, most of us were taught that Catholics weren't real Christians, at least I was. And who the heck are Eastern Orthodox folks? That's a thing? It's good to know. And then imagine my surprise when I discovered that those three traditions all have different Bibles. Sometimes I think about at night, which one's the true, inerrant, infallible, perfect one? There are millions of people looking for a better path forward in their faith. We're no longer tolerating the dehumanization of our queer neighbor. We are fighting for an open, affirming, and inclusive church. We are very open about this. It's no secret. We're not a middle ground. That's not us. But first, the church must repent for decades of harm committed towards the queer community. If you want a good book on that, read Heavy Burdens by Bridget Eileen Rivera. We take seriously the words from our black neighbors when they tell us how white evangelicals have a legacy of fighting on the wrong side of civil rights, and we repent for the evangelicals who committed so much harm towards them and their families for generations, from slavery to the KKK, desegregation to school choice. And lastly, we listen, learn, empathize, and fight with our global neighbors who are under oppression, like my friend Daniel, a Palestinian Christian who was here earlier today, who spoke earlier today, describing the horrors of what is happening in the Gaza Strip from an Israeli military funded by the American empire. From my perspective, I no longer recognize the evangelicalism of my past, but in a way, I'm so grateful for the ways that it radicalized me for the message of Christ and made me who I am today. As the new evangelicals, I and we have made lifelong friends and now feel a true sense of belonging. And it's a relief to build a community that supports each other in our journey. We're grateful. But it's also clear to us that in order for the Christian tradition to move forward, there must truly be a come to Jesus moment in white evangelical spaces. I'm here for that, and hopefully so are you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh, Billy. You're back on the podcast.
Here I am.
It's not very often that you meet someone through the internet, have them on your podcast, and then end up like continuing a friendship with them,
right?
That turns into meeting in person. I met your brother in person, and you and I mean, we text at least once a week at this point with all various things. I'm always sending you articles or studies that my right-wing friends send me about, like, issues that you and I care about. I'm like, okay, what am I missing? How do we actually interpret this? So anyway, it's great to have you back on the pod.
No, again. It's good to be here. It's fun. I really am. I'm really grateful for the friendship that's grown out of it, but also, the pod, everything you're doing, it's all good stuff.
Well, same. I mean, I feel the same way about you. You're writing a book with your brother on the theology of disgust. I'm not going to go into that. We interviewed you and your brother. Go back and listen to it, friends. It's a mind-blowing theory, conversation, perspective.
Tim, I promise to bug you about that book when it comes out. Until then,
I hope you do.
You don't need to hit it again.
I hope you do. I can't wait. Just because we have gained some new audience members, I guess, or however you want to say it, over the past few weeks, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself for them?
Sure. Yeah, no. So my name is Billie. I am a trans woman. I'm a lesbian. I grew up evangelical. I'm a public high school teacher, and everything that entails has pretty much happened to me at this point. So that would be my really, really short pitch. Yeah, I'm kind of a nerd. I don't know.
You are a nerd.
I'm totally a nerd. I like ska music, and
I mean, you also last time you and I talked, you were targeted by libs of TikTok. We talked about that. I mean, we did a full response to that interview with Kaya. So yeah. Anyway, so you and I really, a lot of our relationship has been built around issues that you and I are passionate about, mainly trans rights and just how the church talks about this, especially queer inclusion broadly speaking. Which, by the way, I mean, how do you feel about the news with the UMC?
Oh my gosh,
it's huge.
Thrilled. I am so thrilled. And let me just tell you, so I'm not United Methodist. I've not been Methodist. We were kind of I was Vineyard for a while, and they're a little bit Methodist adjacent. But watching my queer Methodist friends just celebrate, they were crying today. It is so beautiful. It's right now. I mean, I'm sure there'll be complicated feelings and legacy stuff, but right now, people are celebrating, and it's really beautiful. It's just some amazing queer joy.
I truly feel the same way. I mean, when I saw the news, I got literal chills, and it's just it's a great, huge step. Between that and Richard Hayes' new book coming out in September, I don't want to get super optimistic, but I feel like it's another big step towards the tide really churning long term.
Oh my gosh, I think so too. I'm really excited about this. It's you're starting to notice enough little things to celebrate. You're I'm a little bit afraid to say there's a pattern, but this might be a pattern, and I am here for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, we're not here to talk about that, though. No. We're here to berate me. No, I'm just kidding. But we are here to talk about my time and my recap about my time with the Exiles in Babylon conference and kind of my thoughts. Because I did this whole recap. Folks, I recommend listening to if you get time. Mm-hmm. Sharing things from my perspective, right? Hey, here's what I saw. Here's what I heard. Here's my experience. Here's what I really liked. Here's what I kind of found not so great, where I struggled, where I wrestled. Here it is, right? And I knew you were going to listen.
Yeah.
In fact, Billy, I actually used one of the lines that I've heard you use, which is that, Preston's theology is poison wrapped in sugar.
Yep.
Right. I think I got that from you. So I used that in my own way. And then you sent me a really nice, but definitely very much a Billy text, because I asked you, I said, give me your thoughts on this. I really want to hear. I'm trying to hear as I found the whole thing. Can I just read a few excerpts from it? Do I have permission to share? Okay. Let me just see if I can pull this thing up here. Okay. So here is the thing to put it as bluntly as possible, which you know me, I'm from Jersey, I love. So I'm like, yes, give it to me straight. Do not bullshit me. So here's the thing: to put it as bluntly as possible, your analysis came across as exactly the way a straight cis Christian guy would be expected to experience the Sprinkleverse. And I was like, yeah, no, like you're not wrong. You are not wrong, right? Because we have to be very honestly, radically open about this. This issue is an important issue to me, but it's not a personal issue. Right. I am not queer. I am not trans. I am not gay, right? I am none of those things. I am very much a cis het man. That's how I experience the world. Very much so. And so you're right. When you said that, a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, yes, that is completely correct. So I would love for you to expand upon some of these thoughts that I'm sure you've been chewing on this. You and I booked this a couple of days ago. You know, based on my recap and my 15-minute talk, which you also heard, give me your thoughts on that, and then we can kind of dig into some of the theology and some of your real concerns with Preston and the theology that he holds.
For sure. So yeah, I mean, I'll Oreo this one on you and give you the good part to begin with, right? Like, but this is the thing, right? Like, you're right. You don't really have a choice but to experience this thing from your perspective, and because we all do that. And the thing is that this place was full of, not entirely, but it was a lot of people with your perspective, and it was, I would argue, kind of geared towards people who are coming at it mostly from your perspective, right? Like, it was sort of designed for you as well.
Yeah.
And within that framework, like if we kind of narrow that down, if we narrow like humanity or the Christian verse to a bunch of sort of progressive, nice, friendly, straight white guys.
Yep.
So first off, it was actually terrific that you were there, right? Like, I'm actually really thrilled that you could be there and you're pulling people in a direction, right? You show up, it was a really solid, like, hey, this has been my experience, this is the story, this is where we are, we're human, we're here. And it, you know, I mean, good on Sprinkle for having you, because honestly, I did a little like chart of trying to like map out where everybody who was there was. Yes. And it was like, everybody's in this one little like sort of sliver of like nice people evangelicalism, and then there's like Tim is like way off the page over here. It's like, and then there's Tim who's like, hey, hell, like, I don't think so. That seems like a kind of a, you know, a screwed up system. But like, you know, like, I think, you know, anyway, so like, it was important that they would hear that, because if anything, that is probably what was going to stretch them. And at the same time, what I think is missing from like being in and for a place that is built for you is the constant and reinforced message that this place is not for you. We are thinking thoughts about you. We are not thinking your thoughts with you. We are not listening really to you. And I know that they had an entire panel on LGBT, and we can probably talk about that.
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
Right? Yeah. But so like, I'm gonna bracket them, not to say they don't count, because they absolutely count.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that they were so much the audience as they were kind of part of the message.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, right, the way I experience that lineup of speakers, the way I'm going to experience a lot of that is through this preliminary lens of, is this a place that actually will allow me to be? We often use the language, like you'll hear a lot of queer people using the language of like, can I be fully myself here? Yeah. And I think sometimes we hear that as a kind of like, am I allowed to do self-expression, right? Like, can I show up and hold my wife's hand? Can I show up and like, which bathroom can I use? These kinds of questions. And those are legitimate, right? Yeah. But I think beyond that, like, can I show up and be my whole self here means, can I bring all of my gifts to the church? Can I be also viewed as and seen as the Christian, the daughter of Christ, of God that I am here, right? Like, is this a place where I get to be? There's a story I want to, if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you the story, and I'm going to change the name because I haven't got this person's permission to tell the story. But let's call her Wanda. Wanda is a gay woman who started going to a church that I used to go to that was what we call like welcoming but not affirming. It was a very Sprinkle level in like the vibe, right? Yeah. And she experienced what we call the bait and switch, right? Like, so she came in, she knew that like Christianity has not always been great to her and had not always been great to her. She met with a pastor. She said, hey, I'm queer. That's not going to change. I'm married. We have a kid, right? Like, this is what this is. And the pastor gave her the full on, no, you are welcome. God loves everybody. We're not meant to be judgmental. You know, we're about love here. We're not about exclusion here. Like, and she was like, that's such a relief.
Right.
I'm so glad.
Right.
And it wasn't until she had formed deep friendships, had profound, you know, experiences, emotional or spiritual, that she later found out that, yeah, well, there's like a bit of a problem. We're really going to have a conversation about whether or not you can teach Sunday school. And because like kids, and like, it's not me, but people are talking, and we really want to do what's best for the body. And then we start bringing in speakers, and somebody says that she's demon possessed, and, you know, talks about queerness as people being demon possessed, and in the front of the church, and she walked out and never came back. And that it's hard to explain the degree of pain that causes, but so many of us have been through it, right? Because that's walking away from, I mean, all of us, I think everybody who's in the post-evangelical or deconstructing evangelical scene understands the pain of losing the community part of what you had.
Yes.
When you left, when you walked away, when you were pushed out.
Right.
Right. And so to have been pulled into that and opened up and experienced that vulnerability, like opened that vulnerability in yourself under what turn out to be false pretenses, is incredibly painful. And so you learn very quickly to look for these things. You learn to listen to the subtleties of the way they talk about your welcome, to find out, but what is the edge? How far does that put? How fully do I get to be me, a full member of the body in this context? And what we find, what I know about Sprinkle, what I know about Exiles in Babylon is there is a very hard line for me. Like, I would be absolutely welcome to attend. I'm sure. If
Definitely.
I paid my registration, absolutely welcome to attend. He is not going to invite me up on stage. He was pretty clear about that, both in his pre-conference talking. I remember I actually listened to the podcast where he talked about you, because he was getting attacked for like having you at the conference at all, right? And he was he wanted to say like, whoa. Tim is, I think, the only affirming person I'm getting, and I don't have him on the panel about that topic. Like, he really wanted to hold the audience's hand and say, look, you don't need to cancel me. And so as a queer person, like, okay, so what he's saying is somebody like me, not invited to bring my full self to fellowship with him.
Yes. Yeah. And then yes to all that, right? And then what I'm wondering from your vantage point is, and I've talked about this with you, I talked about this many times with you, is just for sake of like language, we'll just call it like the Sprinkle ideology. Okay, that's not a critique of Preston as a human. In case he's listening, him and I do talk. Like, we got along really well. We had a lot of good conversations. So I'm not trying to stab him in the back publicly and be like, oh, that horrible Preston Sprinkle. No. But just because like he is one of the few voices in this evangelical world that's pretty much trying to toe this really awkward line, right? Of like, hey, evangelicals, especially white ones, don't worry, I would take a bullet for traditional marriage. I mean, he literally said that, right? But also the way he behaves, at least in his language, makes people like Elisa Childers be like, this dude's a complete heretic. He's a queer loving heretic who just is way too gentle on these gay people. I mean, so he really gets like a ton of flack for on all sides of the spectrum, besides like his and like that real weird, almost like Russell Moore moderate vibe, right? Where absolutely. Like they're and to Preston's credit, really good critiques of empire, really good critiques of like Christian nationalism. Great, Preston. I'm glad. So I say all that because what the question I'm always wrestling through as a pragmatist, I say this probably on every podcast episode now, but I'm always asking, how do we actually get the change that we want to see? I guess what I'm asking you bluntly, do you see the Sprinkle ideology, right? That approach, ultimately in the long run, is this going to be harmful? Are we going to look back on this and say this is like the MLK white moderate critique, right? And like they did a lot more harm than good? Or is this like, this helped bring people along the path to full affirmation? In my experience, which does not count for everyone's, Preston's work was one of the pieces that led me out of that basement of non-affirmation to now fully affirming, right? So, but I don't want to map that on to the very real and lived experience of the queer, especially the queer Christian community. Because I think most queer people don't give a shit what Preston thinks, right? Whatever.
Right.
But like
Right.
people who are in this space who are like, we're Christian, we're queer, we're fully loved by God, we're accepted, and we're not side B. That's where like this stuff really affects you. Give me your thoughts on this. I mean, how do you read that situation now?
All right, this is going to be an incredibly frustrating answer.
I'm so ready.
But
Frustrate me, Billy.
Right, you say in the long term, is this going to be like kind of the white moderates? This was actually a big problem. They weren't doing what they needed to be doing, and they were actually standing in the way of progress. Or is this going to be like the people that moved us along? These are the people that like they did what good they could, even if it was limited, and we should appreciate that. It is absolutely going to be both.
Oh, no both ends. I need binaries. I need binaries. Either or.
We walked away from that. Tim. No. But it is like, this is absolutely, Sprinkle's views are, and I said, I call them the sweetest poison. Like they are honestly toxic to queer people. They harm us. They hurt us. I know of trans people who have stayed closeted for longer than like was healthy for them because they read Preston stuff, because they interacted with Preston stuff. The work he does against gay marriage and against affirming gay people is incredibly harmful. And in the long run, we are going to be looking back on this. Is my prediction. 20, 30 years. We're going to be looking back on this and we're going to say, look, what he did was he provided a place where people could safely put themselves out of the fight for justice and say, well, I'm a good person. Here's how to be nice. So I'm not one of those bad people that persecute the queers, but I'm also not helping, and I'm taking myself out of this entirely. But in fact, they were hurting us, right? Like it's not just that they were going neutral. They were in fact hurting us. So it's sort of make some kind of like a Switzerland comparison, right? Like, you're neutral, but you're also like storing some Nazi gold here, right? Like, like that is also going to be the case. But, and here's the thing, there are also people right now whose lives are better because of his work. And I don't want to deny that either. And I'm not just talking about his work. Like, I actually like him on the subject of pacifism, right? Like on nonviolence, I think he's good. He helped me along when I was moving in an Anabaptist direction. I now am full on Mennonite, but like he helped me with that. So it's not that he doesn't do good work. He has done some really, really good work, and he has helped and saved people, and including he has, I'm sure, helped families stay together because like his book both of his, well, all four now of his books on queer people do encourage families, like, don't throw out your kids, right? Like, be kind to people. And that just basic kindness, I know, saves lives. And I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. So I genuinely mean it when I say it just is going to do both. We're stuck with that nuance.
Let's talk about, here's another question I was thinking about that I would love your insight on. I kind of think like, okay, you know me, Billy, we met in person. So when I'm in body with people, especially folks I disagree with, I'm always trying to find the common ground. Like, okay, can we start here? Can we start here? Right? Like, okay, we both love The Office. Great start. Now, can we move to Christian nationalism? Right? I'm always trying to find, like, where could we find the handshake moment? And then where do we say, no, this is real disagreement? So I hung out with a lot of people at that event. A lot of Psi B Christians, a lot of people who were just, there as speakers, whatever. One of the questions I asked often to people who would be like, hey, I hold to a traditional view of marriage, what I would say a lot is, okay, I hear you. You have this biblical ideal that you think is clear in scripture. I don't have time to argue that with you. Maybe for fun, we can talk about later on. How about the legal element, though? Like, where are you legally, right? Do you believe that queer people have a right to exist in America in a secular society, that healthcare rights should be protected, that they have a right to marital equality, etc.? Because, and again, maybe I'm thinking too pragmatic, so I don't want to offend other queer folks out there and sound callous to the very toxic and deadly theology that is that theology. Statistically, we know that. Again, though, pragmatically, I'm almost at the point where I'm like, I don't really care so much what you think in your head. I care what you're voting for, right? So if you hold this view in your head that you think the Bible is clear, and like you and your church of like 100 people have this view, it's very clear about like where you stand. Okay, but can you at least acknowledge that those people who are not in your church have a constitutional right to the pursuit of happiness and to having the same protections as their heterosexual counterparts? I heard a lot of people say, overall, Yes. I was like, okay,
That's awesome.
That's a good start. Like, that's a really good start for me. But you give me your thoughts on that. Like, it's a shame that we even have to get like this granular and get this parsed out. But this is the world that we live in. What are your thoughts?
So here you're going to have to, I think, to make it make sense, you have to start separating the alphabet of our little alphabet mafia, right?
You said it, not me. That was Billy. Tim Whitaker did not say that.
That was
okay. I'll be clear.
This is one of those weird phrases that gets used by like all us and then the people that absolutely hate us.
The Venn diagram, the overlap.
Really, there's the one place. There's the one thing we can shake hands on. I mean,
so funny.
But so for here, like I think it's true. And I'm just going to describe Sprinkle himself as I understand it, right? Like, because he's in that kind of general category of people that are like, yeah, we need to treat them right, and complicated interactions with like empire government. But like, I get that like people's basic rights should probably be protected, and like maybe talk about marriage, but like, people should not be able to be like fired and kicked out of their homes for being queer. And I think that's true, and that's really helpful for my cis LGBT siblings. Preston also, and he could change on this. Like, this is the trans people get treated differently on this front, and it is. I agree. Our rights as trans people are like a step behind. Like my rights as a trans person are sort of a step behind my rights as a lesbian, right? Like, and I think this holds for this crowd as well, right? Like, Sprinkle still promulgates a view called rapid onset gender dysphoria. It has been debunked again and again and again and again and again. There was one really poorly designed study. It was actually recalled because it was poorly designed. Sprinkle still cites it. It had to be republished and like toned down in terms of the claims. And it's this idea that transness is a social contagion, that children are becoming convinced that they are trans through like experiencing
like
other
TikTok,
trans kids
things like that. Yeah.
All that. Libs of TikTok loves this view.
They love it.
And Sprinkle keeps promulgating it. Sometimes he does it very like, yeah, but I really think it's this when he's talking on his podcast to people he's interviewing. Sometimes he's a little bit more gentle with it with hey, well, how do we feel about this? This seems reasonable to me, but like, hey, he'll sort of half admit that the research isn't there. The research is actually there. It just doesn't hold up. They keep testing this theory and it just does not hold up. But here's the thing. It treats us as a contagion. And because that view treats us as a contagion, it actually justifies limiting people's exposure to us, right? Like, this is the view that is used it's one of the views that is used by Republican legislatures who are trying to pass restrictions on trans rights, on my ability as a school teacher to teach school. And this is what's going on in Florida, right? Like, Florida has recently tried to make it so that I would not be allowed to teach school because I'm too visibly and obviously trans. And that would communicate to the children that like transness good, right? That's where the grooming language comes in, right? You're grooming a child to question their sexual identity or become trans, right? That's the connection for the audience. No, exactly. And so I'm not saying that Sprinkle is like endorsing those Florida laws, although I've heard him he sort of plays around. I've not heard him publicly land on how he feels about various laws restricting various trans rights and trans healthcare and trans like visibility. He sort of plays around with it, but absolutely the ideology he presses is critical to the efforts to roll back trans rights across a lot of these states. So the answer is sort of split, right? I mean, it's on LGBT stuff. I think there is a kind of live and let live. And this really goes back to where when I was doing that like silly Venn diagrams and trying to plot things out, I really think is going on. And I do think as like the new evangelicals and sort of being this post-evangelical movement, this is a really interesting group of people that need to be paid attention to, are these people that are like these sort of old school evangelicals. Like, I remember having the conversation about like, can't we do civil rights for queer people, even if the church isn't going to affirm them, back in 2012, right?
Like, honestly, same. Like, I was asking the same question when I was 18.
Right. And there is a usefulness to it. Like, it's like, I mean, I'll take it, right? Like, oh my gosh. I think I was, now I'm just going from memory, but I think like we're over like slightly half of evangelical identifying people under the age of 30 now do actually support same-sex marriage for civil unions. Right? So, which is going to make it hard for the court to roll it back, which I'm only worried they want to do, but
yeah, right.
It's going to make it harder for them. Right. So it's absolutely useful. It comes from a good place, right? Like this comes from people who are saying, look, I can't affirm this, but I want to get as close to affirming it as I feel like I can get in good conscience. And I appreciate that impulse.
To me, this whole, I think about this too often, Billy. I become a content creator, they said. Start a nonprofit, they said. Podcast for a living, they said. And then your mind is just full of these kinds of thoughts all day where you're ruminating on them. It just makes me so frustrated that really, with the rise of the moral majority and Jerry Falwell, we see such an uptick in the queer community being targeted, right? I mean, this is like not a new phenomena. White evangelicals, AIDS was God's judgment. There's always a new angle to dehumanize folks who are queer, right? It's a mental disorder. It's perversion. What's next? Bestiality, right? I mean, and again, like, we think that these are new things. Jerry Falwell, they were saying the same exact thing in the 80s, the same thing. And, what frustrates me is I think that so much of this conversation would have such a different tone if the evangelical church was known almost like the Catholic Church, in the sense of like, hey, we've had these beliefs forever. Okay. We've been anti-abortion since before America was a country. This is just where we land. And we also recognize that, we live in America. So outside the church, like, do what you got to do kind of vibe, and I'm sure that there are radical Catholics. I'm not saying that there aren't, but I'm just trying to, in my head, I kind of view like the Catholic Church being, guys, look, we've been on these issues the same way for 2,000 years. We haven't budged. Yeah. Okay. I can respect that. People have their convictions, whatever. But like this culture war, take back the country, fight the demon-possessed people, this like very evangelical, charismatic language that we hear from now, it just has upped the ante. It's upped the level of rhetoric. So of course, people who are under the boot of that are going to push back even harder, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just frustrating that we're here trying to parse out the nuance between non-affirming theology and also not being an asshole. Yep. Right. Like also being able to recognize that other people outside of your faith tradition, or your little brand of Christianity have a right to exist without government intrusion. That would be unfair treatment compared to other people groups. That just burns me up.
Yeah, no, I don't love it either.
Right. And this is not a personal issue for me. I'm just watching my friends go through it, and I'm watching the rhetoric, and I'm just like, and that was kind of like, just so the audience knows, you were one of the people when Preston invited me to come out. You were one of the people I called. I was like, I got to get Billy's perspective. I trust Billy's perspective. Billy is very nuanced. You're a great communicator. You know your shit. And I hold your opinion in very high regard in my life. And so I thought to myself, well, let me see what she has to say. And then I'll kind of navigate with like the board and, because honestly, I didn't want to get like, Tim, what are you doing at this non-affirming event? Like you're no longer safe for us as this community, right? But at the same time, so much of my work, even personally, is saying, hey, as the white guy who's pro-evangelical passing, I will go into these spaces and advocate for the work that we're trying to do, right? And so that, you and I talked about it, and so I said, okay, I think that this is kind of the play. I'm so glad I did it. I'm glad I got to say from the pulpit in front of 1,000 people, we are here to push the church forward when it comes to queer inclusion. Like, we are very blunt. We do have a line. That's the line, right? Okay. And a lot of people, here's the crazy thing. I got quite a few DMs from people who were like, hey, I was there. I share your views completely on this. I think that this is also the future. So great work. Keep it up. I'm like, whoa. I had several people come up to me and say, hey, I love what you had to say. It was really provoking. And I had several folks come up to me and say, I'm so sorry because I prejudged you and TNE ahead of time, and I didn't like you guys at all. And hearing your story, I saw so much of myself in this story. So thank you. So I think overall, me going and talking was a net positive, right? I still just wrestle though with, like, to your point, my experience versus why this isn't really designed for, right, people who they're talking about so much.
Yeah, the line "nothing about us without us" that I learned from disability rights activists.
Oof.
It always rings in my head. Right?
Really
this is the, if you're going to talk about people, they should be in the room. In fact, they should be at the table. In fact, you should be listening to them before you talk about them. You should be talking to them.
Well, I think and again, I'm using Preston interchangeably for like this world. So it's not a personal thing towards Preston. I think Preston might say, well, look, like we have this, Center for Gender and Sexuality. We have a lot of queer folks who are actually involved. They're just side B. And that's where we get to this panel. And I tried, Billy, hopefully you could tell in my recap, I tried to be just so, I have a very strict personal policy of it's not my job or my right to tell people how to manage their own sexuality, right? Or gender identity. That it's just not my world to do it. If it's just not. So I tried to like navigate that as best I could, but I struggled with that a ton, and not because I think that it's wrong or what they're doing is unhealthy. I mean, in fact, like I said in the recap, many of them, their challenge of community and of breaking up like what is seen as family, super compelling, and things that I thought about for a long time that I'm like, hell yeah, we need new families that are kingdom minded, that break apart this nuclear family nonsense. Hell yeah to that. But it just seemed like, and again, I use this word, it is what it is, but it just seemed like a very unnecessarily heavy burden to carry. That being said, that's not my decision. That's theirs, and I respect it. What are your thoughts as someone who is in this space, who is a trans woman, right? Who is a lesbian and also married, right? All of those things. How do you see the side B space? And then how do you view the side B conversation that happened at the conference?
Oof, you got 3 hours?
I have 2 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's do it. Okay. So I have a lot of love and respect for my side B siblings and sisters and brothers. And I want to kind of clarify some language use. And this is a little bit special to me, like not special to me. I'm kind of falling in a place. There's no way to talk about this conversation without like landing on some like things that we debate.
Fair.
But as far as I'm concerned, a person shouldn't be calling themselves side A or side B unless they are themselves specifically actually like gay or bi or pan, right? Like unless they have a non-straight sexuality, non-heterosexual sexuality, or ace people, right? So this is like, I will speak to it, and I do call myself side A because I'm a lesbian, not because I'm trans. So the whole sides language was developed back in the day when trans people weren't really being talked about, and it doesn't speak to us.
Got it.
And I have known straight people to say like, hey, my theology is kind of in line with side B. And that's a kind of clever, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. That's like, you're kind of working a way around. I don't love it when straight people call themselves side B. I think that is because, and this gets to the second point, and where I really appreciate what you said, both in the original and then just now, in your original recap and just now, it is a very different thing to talk about a theology that does affect you and a theology that does not affect you. Like, so when my side B siblings and sisters and brothers talk about being side B, one, there's a huge diversity in that, right? There are side B Christians who are really clear that they think I am in sin about that, and they have a thing they want to say to me about this. There are a lot of other side B Christians that I know that are really happy for me, right? They say like, I only see that there is flourishing in you. I'm happy for your marriage. I'm happy for your life. I'm happy for my side A siblings and the freedom they have in Christ. My own convictions don't allow me to make that choice for me.
One example of that could be a Bridget Eileen Rivera. I love her. She's great. She's side B. Last time I checked, she's in a long-term commitment, non-romantically, with a partner. And in her book, she pretty much says that. She goes, I respect that decision. It wasn't my conviction.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, when side B people take that perspective, again, that makes it very, I mean, obviously it's a very comfortable position as a side A Christian for them to take. But like, we do this, like, and our community has felt attacked by the church at large long enough that there is an incredible importance of just maintaining as much solidarity as we can in that context.
Yeah.
So absolutely. And I am 100% in favor of the message of like 85% of the message that side B people have for the church. Like when my side B siblings are facing the straight church and saying, here is what we need from you. You are putting these heavy burdens of celibacy on us with your theology, which we accept, but we need your help to do it. We're meant to be a community. Yeah. We're not meant to be doing this. I mean, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to cheer for them. And I love them.
Right.
Like that is right. Because as you kind of point out, like they're actually leading the whole church into a healthier theology of like commitment and like decentering just marriage as like this kind of thing.
100%.
And like learning to do community. It's beautiful. It's
100%.
And I'm 100% in favor of it.
Yeah.
I do have opinions about the Center for Gender, Sexuality, and Faith.
Oh, shocker! You have opinions about something President Sprinkle's a part of? I would never have guessed.
And a little bit about Greg Coles. He's a very nice person, and sometimes he makes statements that I really wish he would just shut up.
I did meet Greg. We had some wonderful conversations, and I'm hoping at some point to talk to him again because I have more questions. We didn't have time to get into it.
I would love to meet him in person. He seems incredibly approachable, and I'm sure that we would have a really enjoyable conversation.
Yeah.
And he's involved even in some of the less bad things that the center has put forward on trans people. He's been behind. And so, like, you know, as a straight guy, he's not straight, but as a gay cis guy,
right,
I can appreciate some of that. And side B doesn't talk about trans people. And that is itself a complication. So there was one person who identifies as trans that I saw in the speaker lineup, right? And I was looking at it, and I know that person, as I understand their story from Told in Sprinkle's book, where he mentions them, that person is not like identifying as a gender other than one they were assigned at birth at this point, at least again, as of the book. So,
right.
So there was not I'm not going to say there wasn't trans representation. I'm not taking trans identity away from somebody who has had that experience and who has that experience. What I'm going to say is that the kind of trans representation that was available there is not representative of the way, you know, that trans Christians as a whole are talking about this conversation,
right,
and are talking about this experience. And that's not to undermine that person. That person has their own convictions in life.
Totally.
And I don't think a person should try to undermine them or like contradict their own narrative of their life. But that's pretty representative of Sprinkle, right? Like I've listened to almost everything he's done on trans and read almost everything he's done on trans people. I can't think of a single time he has ever interviewed a person who was a Christian, who thought that transition was good, is good and blessed by God, and who does not hold to one of these like weird fringe, like pseudo theories, like rapid onset gender dysphoria or something like that. Like when he finds somebody who seems pretty mainstream, but agrees with him about something and he gets flack on, he'll get them on. But like somebody who just straight up is a Christian trans person who disagrees with him across the board on his stance, I've never heard him interview, platform, or engage with them. And that's a hard thing, right? Like that's a hard thing. The other thing that I saw from that panel, the people he chose, that I see with that crowd is a need. And this is where I feel like it feels like I would be condescending to say that I feel bad for my side B siblings on this front. And I don't want to say it that way.
Right.
I'm going to say that part of what they seem to carry and have to carry into spaces like Exiles is the need to remind the audience that they are side B and not side A, right? Like it's as though they have to prove, and I've seen this time and again. I see this when I watch Revoice conferences. I've seen this when they have to like do this initial opening statement usually, or sometimes it's a closing statement where they say, and I hold to a traditional sexual ethic. They can't just talk about what they need straight people to hear from them. They have to like say, I get to be here. They have to sort of say like, I'm in the good group of gays, right? Like I'm in the group that you have agreed to listen to. And I'm going to remind you of that. And I have to remind you of that again and again and again. If I just came up here and said, I'm gay and here's what I need the church to know about me, and never said what their sexual ethic was, they don't get a listen because they get presumed to be side A. And this is a problem, right? Like think about what this community, what it communicates to them, right? Like that their inclusion is contingent on continuing to hold this theology that they hold, which is so heavy to carry. And then B, what it says to side A Christians is, look, the price of admission was something that is not open to you.
Right.
The price of participation.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. It's funny. I did meet a side B gay man who I did ask. I said, hey, but like, how about when it comes to other people who are gay and who are side A, so to speak? And he goes, oh, I fully get it, fully respect it. Super cool. I'm like, I'm glad to hear that. That's wonderful. One of the things that was interesting to me kind of being there, and I really was so busy. Like I got there in Boise on Wednesday. I ran into Daniel Bonanora at the airport. And so him and I were like hugging and just like, oh my God, we finally got a chance to meet. And from there we were attached at the hip. We got dinner. Then I had to write that 15-minute speech. And when I gave it to Adele to look over, she's like, yeah, this is good, but it needs some work. So like up until 5:30 on Thursday, I'm like working with her trying to get this thing nailed. And that, it came out great because of Adele working with me on that. And then after that, it's late night dinner at Buffalo Wild Wings with that whole deconstruction panel. And then, et cetera. So it's very busy. But, one of the questions I tried to ask wherever I could to people that I really wanted to hear from is like, there was, and this was one of the things where I hate this word. I hate the word biblical. Right? biblical. And I'm like, what are we talking about here? We don't actually mean biblical, right? Like this is a code for a very specific interpretation of the text. Now, people like Preston and others would say, well, this is also historic church tradition. That's just not a good enough argument because most of us now practice birth control. And up until the 20th century, it was completely condemned. That was the historic Christian tradition. So we are okay with things changing when it makes sense to us. I mean, and let's face it, as good Protestants, we don't give a shit about the church tradition. I don't follow the church. Started. Right. I don't follow the church calendar. I never even recited basic like Apostles' Creed stuff in my church. Right. It was the Bible, sola scriptura. So for a second, let's just ignore the church tradition and let's ignore the creed just for a minute. A little, mind game here.
If we're looking, bring them back.
Yeah. If we're looking just at the quote unquote Bible, and we want to take the Bible seriously, and that means doing our best to understand the Bible on its own terms in the context it comes from and how we navigate that, you really do come away with a very different understanding of the biblical view of sexuality than what you were told. And the person I cite often on this is Dr. Jennifer Bird. Her work on this is so good. Her new book, what's it called? Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say? I believe is what it's called. Yeah, and like she just goes through like, hey, there's actually no word for husband or wife in the Greek or the Hebrew. It's always man or woman, and then it's translated by translators to be husband or wife. But it doesn't mean husband or wife how we think about it, right? Like, and how the language is taken, how there's no consent ethic and there's no mutuality ethic. Like there's just so many layers that when you start peeling it back, you go, wait, my marriage today looks nothing like a biblical marriage, except for the fact that I'm married to a person of the opposite sex. Like that is the only, in the Venn diagram, that's the only common factor. My marriage was based on consent. My marriage was based on mutual love. My marriage is based on no patriarchy. Like we don't. Yeah. No, Sarah does not submit to me. I did not take my wife one day because I wanted her to be mine. She wasn't a spoil of war. I didn't negotiate. How many years I should work for her. Like there's no other overlap in my marriage besides I'm a man and she's a woman, right? Like, and our genitals are different. Like, literally, I'm just being frank with you, right?
Yeah. No,
and so, like, I pressed Preston on this. I pressed other people on this. Like, help me understand what we're actually talking about here and why we're so committed to this really strange view that we think the Bible is somehow clear on this. Not to mention Jesus's passages on the eunuchs. Some were born, some were made. Not to mention Paul's comments that his ideal is that we're all single. It just doesn't add up. And so it was frustrating for me. And again, I loved meeting everyone. This is no shade to anyone, but just hearing all day the biblical view. What are we talking about? What biblical view? That drove me crazy.
It's, the one that like my people have been calling the biblical view for a while. And so that's what we call it. We call it the biblical view. And we feel good because since we call it that, it has to be that, right? And we don't want to think about it too closely.
I just find the view untenable. And I'm sorry, Billy, if I may, can I just go for one more minute? Do you mind? I know you're the guest here, but
I forgot to bring it. But
but you and I are friends. I mean, this is our phone call conversations, right? Yeah. The other big piece of this that I've asked this question to so many people. Like, I really want to know. I've asked this question to people like Honest Youth Pastors, very conservative. Right? I've asked people in other spaces, help me understand why Bob Jones was wrong. Yeah. Help me understand why when Bob Jones in the 1960s says the biblical view of segregation is clear, here's the Bible verses. He pulls from Acts, I believe, when I think it's Paul giving this speech about how, God has put man in different places of the world and gave them boundaries. And he goes, look, this is clear. Men have we're given God-given boundaries. We have to respect those boundaries. Therefore, segregation is biblical. And then he goes on to say in this passage that there's been a modernist movement to lower the scriptural standard. And that it's been a demonic thing. Satan has been a part of this. It's a liberal ideology. This is Bob Jones in the 60s. Why do we look back on that now and say Bob Jones was not biblical, when Bob Jones insists that his view is the historic biblical way of viewing these texts that enforce segregation? But now all of a sudden, when it comes to this issue, all of these other texts, right, that we have context for, and that at a minimum we could say are debated. We could debate what is Paul talking about when he uses this word, or we could debate all that. That is the minimum. We debate it. Suddenly, the Bible's clear on that, though. And now we're way out of bounds to say maybe we are reading this thing incorrectly, ultimately, right? Like, help me understand that. Paul does tell slaves to obey their masters, even if they're cruel. Why would we have no problem saying no to that now? The slave owners didn't think that was the case. They were just being biblical, right? Like, I've asked that to so many people. I have yet to hear a compelling reason for why that's definitely unbiblical and wrong back then. But today, this is clearly biblical, Christian 101, gospel centric. Blows my mind.
I know it's if you ever do get somebody who gives you a halfway decent answer, I'd love to hear it, because I haven't. I mean, for me, that was when I read Mark Noll's The Civil War as Theological Crisis. That was the one that was like, oh my gosh, we've been doing this forever, right? Like, every single time there's like some major sort of semi-social upheaval and cultural distinction, some group of Christians start calling their side the biblical traditional side, and the other side has to find ways to like reinterpret this text to say that's not a good application of what's going on here.
Right.
Like, this is not actually applying this way.
Right. 1,000%. For me, it was the book The Bible Told Himself by J. Russell Hawkins. A damning critique of Southern evangelicals and how they insisted that the Bible was clear on maintaining segregation. So anyway, I don't want to rant about that forever, because I can, but these are the conversations that I'm still trying to find better answers to. Because
I'll give you
go ahead.
No, so I'll give you an example. This is what I always think of when this one comes up, right? Is that, there were no tomatoes. Sorry, I'm a world history teacher. There were no tomatoes in Europe until like the Columbian Exchange, right?
Wait, what?
Until after Columbus. There were no tomatoes in Europe. They're from the Americas.
This is why you're a world history teacher and why I am not.
Right? So this is the thing, right? But there was pasta in Italy. I'm just going to use Italy. It was also it's from China originally, but there's pasta in Italy, right? Before there were tomatoes in Italy, right? So I always feel like when people start doing this whole thing about like marriage and the biblical language and the text, like those authors. So if you ask me, like, if I came up to you and I was like, you can't eat spaghetti, because that's not what they were talking about when they talked about pasta, because they never envisioned tomatoes. Every time they talked about pasta, they were talking about a dish that did not have tomatoes on it. And I'd be like, it never occurred to them to think about tomatoes. You can't judge from that. Like, that's not... Anyway. So this is my, like, let's pay attention to the Bible in its own context and see what it actually has to say for itself and what never occurred to them to say. And then we got to find some principles about how God feels about people and maybe apply that.
Does it also annoy you, like it does me, how obsessed evangelicals are with genitals and sex?
Oh my gosh, it's so creepy. It's incredibly creepy.
I mean, obsessed.
It's so weird.
It is. I just think about, like, there are so many more pressing issues that are actually affecting people groups and systems, right? I say it every time. We can't get affordable healthcare in the country. Livable wages are not a thing. The federal minimum wage is still $7.25, right? And for some reason, this evangelical world is obsessed with what people do in their bedroom or how they identify. Like literally, no one is telling you that you have to be trans or that you have to change magically somehow your sexual orientation, right? And that I have to become a gay man and marry a dude and like lose my, like, no one is doing that, right? All these folks are asking for is, hey, can we just exist in society and have representation like all of you do and be kind of left alone and just be accepted for who we are? And like, and this is, listen, people in general, I think, are obsessed with sex. And we see this in all different places in religious groups. So it's not unique, but in our tradition, the answer is like, no, you can't do that. Sorry, we have to have our hands in all of this. We have to know what's going on in your bedroom. We have to legislate your morality from our Christian worldview here of what you can and can't do. But, hey, if someone's poor, they probably just deserved it. So we really can't help them. Like maybe some charity handouts, but we can't do any systemic change because that's socialism. It's like, guys, well, it's so backwards to me. It's so backwards.
It's insane. Can you, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking you're talking about like this obsession that they have. Can you imagine, like, this is the other thing is that it's not that it's new, but like this degree of intensity, we're hitting a new wave. Like I was thinking about this, like I said the sinner's prayer when I was 5 years old. This is 1987.
Such a good Christian.
That's when I became a Christian. I asked Jesus in my heart. Wow. And can you imagine? I'm just trying to think about like if somebody had told my pastor then, they were like, okay, so you said Billy got saved. He's like, yeah, no, absolutely. Billy got saved. And it's like, okay, did Billy ask Jesus into her heart? Yeah, Billy asked Jesus into her heart. And did she ask for forgiveness for her sins? Yes, she asked for forgiveness for her sins. Okay. And does she think the right things about marriage? And you're like, well, I mean, I have opinions about marriage, but what are you talking about? But now you have people be like, this is a gospel issue, man. Like they'll come at me and they'll be like,
issue.
If you do not hold the right view of marriage, you are not following Jesus' gospel. I'm like, what has happened to us?
It is it's mind blowing. Hey, it's not in the first they go, this happens to me all the time. Are you even a Christian? Yeah, I'm more Christian than ever. What? Do you affirm the Apostles' Creed? Yeah, I absolutely do. Do you affirm a physical resurrection? I absolutely do. I also believe in queer inclusion. Oh, there it is. You're a heretic.
That's what it
under
is.
What creed? Under what? Like when Paul says this is the gospel, that Christ was that he died and was buried and rose again in 3 days according to the scriptures. He doesn't say, oh, and also he had this traditional view of sexual ethics. That's like not a thing for the gospel. Right?
Nope.
And all of a sudden, the people who love to talk about grace through faith and freedom in Christ and how simple the gospel is have added another element. Like you can't have pronouns in your bio. You're not a real Christian. You definitely can't be.
I felt the Holy Spirit leaving me when I added my pronouns.
I believe it, right? And Billy, if you are a trans woman and other folks are queer, they're definitely not Christian. And as a cis het man, if I affirm my queer friends and siblings, I'm definitely not a Christian, right? So it's like, there's so many layers beyond this simple quote unquote gospel message in these spaces. Oh, I'm so glad I am not in that basement anymore. Cause it's maddening. When you really examine it, it is maddening.
It hurts. It really does.
Yeah, I believe it. And now this conversation's turned into one of our phone calls. I'm just ranting to you and you're affirming me.
You gotta be here for me sometimes, Tim.
Do you have any like last final thoughts on my take on the conference, on what I said at the conference, on the conference itself? Like any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I just kind of want to sort of summarize the way I've been thinking about it because I have been sort of reflecting on this ever since.
Yeah,
since your original thing on it, and you asked me early on, like long term, what do I think?
Yeah, like
where do I think the place of these folks will be? And this is. It depends on who. Like I think God can use all kinds of things, but I also, there's that, and I'm misappropriating the line a little bit here, but it's like these things must come, but woe to him through whom they come, right? Like God can use people like Sprinkle and people who are in places like Sprinkle, and sometimes that might go well. If they are doing everything they can and they're listening to the Holy Spirit, I'm not God, and I don't get to decide at what rate God pricks our consciences and calls us to move forward into greater freedom and into greater affirmation of his body,
right?
Their body. That's not my call to make, and God can use that. And at the same time, there's going to be, I believe, a lot of regret in the long term over the number of walls and barriers that a lot of these folks have put up to the gospel and the amount of pain that these people have caused to queer people, to the families and friends and loved ones of queer people. And I think that matters. And this is why these things are really complicated, is because we have to hold both. Like we can't say, I acknowledge that this does harm for queer people, that this actually hurts, but it also does a lot of good. And I want to focus on that because that needs to be talked about. That does actually need to be talked about, but we can't put aside the pain it does. And at the same time, I can't say, because this hurts me, I refuse to accept that it could be doing anything good for anybody else, because it absolutely can be doing good for other people. And that's uncomfortable, and it's incredibly non-Twitter friendly, right? Because you can't reduce that to like not Twitter friendly. Because like I have 1,000,001 critiques of Preston Sprinkle's thinking and especially his scholarship when it comes to trans issues. And I'll be the first one to tell you he does some good things, and I think most of the time he's in good faith and trying to be earnest. I wish he would talk to me.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do about that. Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I'll hit him up on the Voxers, like, bro, Preston, let's make the conversation happen. Maybe even just privately. Like, let's just have a.
She disagrees with you. I'd take it.
Yeah, I know you would. Listen, if I got Daniel Bonanora at that event advocating for Palestinian liberation, you know, I got some networking skills, so I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do.
Nobody has ever claimed that you don't, or if they have, they never met you.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, listen, I appreciate the both and here. I think that is important. You know, I live in tension all the time. I know you do as well, and not for the same reasons. Obviously, I'm removed from this. It's not a personal thing, as I've said several times now. But just even broadly speaking, I'm always trying to think about when it comes to Christian nationalists, like how do you have conversations with them and, you know, try and find common ground to push things forward in a more positive direction. It just, you're right. Some of these things are not designed for Twitter. I would never tell Twitter, you know, yeah, I talked to so-and-so person yesterday on the phone. It went great. I would just be, people would just like lose their mind. Right. But to make that change, I believe people need to do whatever they can, however they can with the privilege that they have to make these things happen. Right. So,
yeah.
Oh,
no, exactly.
I think it's a real fair summary.
I think, yeah. So, I mean, this is what I would say to my queer siblings is just, you know, I know that is not a room that we're comfortable in. Let's be glad that there is some positive movement happening in that room, even while we grieve the fact that we can't go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I really, really believe that between Richard Hayes, the UMC, even things like the Post-Evangelical Collective, which you were a part of, which I was here I am in the Lion's Den at Exiles in Babylon while you're hanging out with Zach Lambert and Angela Parker, all the people, Mish, who I love.
So
I'm
good,
just
Tim.
like all the
it
cool
was
people.
So good. It was so good. It was a really terrific conference.
I had so much FOMO. Much FOMO.
It was you rightly so. I mean, I'm sorry, but like rightly so. I can't. I got no comfort.
That's the meanest thing you said to me on this entire episode. Yeah, well, maybe I'll try and get Zach Lambert on soon to kind of debrief his thoughts. I mean, David Gushy was there anyway. I'm
oh my
gosh,
stop,
yeah,
but he was good. I tell you what, and
Gushy
totally
knows
different
his
conversation. But
yeah,
there was some really good stuff happening in that space.
So hopefully, my optimistic hope is that within a decade, you know, hopefully way sooner. I mean, you know, lives are on the line. So this is urgent. I don't want to sound like it's, whenever we get there. But I do think within a decade, mass amounts of Christians are going to look back and be like, what were we thinking? What were they thinking? Yeah. Why did we tolerate people like Charlie Kirk at our churches? I mean, this could, listen, some people might be saying, Tim, you tell me about Christian nationalism all day. This is wishful thinking. I get that, okay? And white supremacy has a unique way of reinventing itself. It hasn't gone away. We see it now more than ever, and arguably in some spaces. But I do hope that there's another shift in the evangelical psyche of we got something really wrong, and we hurt a lot of people, and we have to own that, and then think about how we move forward in a more inclusive way. You know, like I hope, that is my dream. And hopefully things like Richard Hayes and the UMC are some of the big dominoes that push it forward.
No, we'll pray it so, for sure.
I think if NT Wright changes his mind,
that would be big.
That would be like big. Maybe one of the final nails in the coffin, because I know him and Richard Hayes are good friends. So
that would,
yeah,
you know.
Anyway,
Miroslav Volf, if we can get Volf to like officially make a statement, I'd take it. Yeah. Oh, that would be good.
Yeah, I'm with you. Billy, my friend, great seeing you as always. I'm sure I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, we'll do it. Something will come up.
Something will come up. Did you see this tweet said?
Also, so I know.
Yeah, right. Someone sent me this study. Any idea what's going on here? Because I'm an idiot. I'm not. I can't read this stuff. Anyway, all right. I'll let you go. We'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, man.